On the early morning of August 31, 1888, a horrific discovery was made in the impoverished district of Whitechapel. The victim, Mary Ann Nichols, had been brutally attacked and left in a state that defied comprehension. The wounds were precise, ritualistic, and deeply shocking to the witnesses. This was not a random act of violence, it was a calculated assault that signaled the beginning of a terror that would paralyze London. The police were overwhelmed, facing a crime scene that seemed almost impossible to process. You might think the sheer brutality would lead to an immediate arrest, but the lack of definitive evidence meant the killer walked free, leaving only a trail of blood and fear. What you're about to hear changed everything about how we understand forensic investigation. The first murders established a pattern, the targeting of marginalized women in the poorest parts of the city. The police quickly realized they were dealing with a serial attacker, a killer who seemed to operate with impunity. The second major victim, Annie Chapman, was found just days later. Her case amplified the terror, forcing the authorities to acknowledge the sheer professionalism of the assailant. Investigators began piecing together a timeline, correlating the locations and the specific methods of attack. We are looking at a killer who knew the geography of the slums, who understood the rhythm of the night, and who seemed to operate outside the law. The initial assumption was that the killer was a desperate man, but the precision of the mutilation suggested something far more calculated. How quickly did the police become desperate enough to start linking these seemingly separate events? As the attacks continued, the profile of the killer began to solidify in the public imagination. The victims were all working-class women, often prostitutes, making them vulnerable targets. The official records show that the killer seemed to be attracted to a specific type of environment, the narrow, dimly lit alleys of Whitechapel. The medical examiners struggled to categorize the injuries, noting the extreme violence alongside an almost surgical precision. This discrepancy, the raw brutality paired with the meticulous nature of the wounds, is the key paradox of the Ripper case. It forced investigators to question whether they were dealing with passion, or something far more organized. The evidence suggested a killer who was intelligent, powerful, and intimately familiar with the victim's vulnerability. The investigation intensified after the discovery of Elizabeth Stride. The pattern continued, becoming almost a gruesome calendar. With each body, the pressure on Scotland Yard mounted, leading to the development of modern investigative techniques, even if they were rudimentary by today's standards. Investigators started compiling dossiers on the victims, looking for common threads beyond their socio-economic status. They searched for a geographical nexus, a specific time window, or perhaps a psychological vulnerability shared by all the women. What they found was a killer who seemed to operate in a vacuum, leaving no witnesses, no reliable fingerprints, and no clear motive. The mystery deepened with every passing night. The discovery of Mary Jane Kelly marks a significant turning point. Her crime scene was particularly gruesome, forcing the police to confront the sheer scale of the violence. The sheer level of mutilation suggested a level of depravity that shocked the entire establishment. At this point, the official investigation shifted from simply finding bodies to understanding the why behind the attacks. Were the wounds meant to punish, or were they a form of twisted communication? The police began theorizing about the killer's motives. Was it sexual gratification, a form of social commentary, or something rooted in deep psychological pathology? The complexity of the case forced the early development of criminal profiling, a field that barely existed at the time. As the attacks wound down in late 1888, the police began to narrow their focus to specific suspect groups. They interrogated anyone who had been in the vicinity, scrutinizing anyone with access to the impoverished areas. Theories ranged from disgruntled doctors and butchers to members of the police force itself. The lack of a single, solid lead meant the investigation was a cycle of brilliant breakthroughs followed by frustrating dead ends. Every theory was eventually debunked, adding layers of complexity to the puzzle. We are left with the disturbing realization that the killer was a ghost, a phantom who understood how to evade the most sophisticated law enforcement of the era. One of the most persistent and chilling pieces of evidence involves the lack of a single, unifying motive. Was the killer targeting specific individuals, or was the act purely symbolic? The debate over whether the killer was motivated by misogyny, class resentment, or some deeper psychological compulsion remains unresolved. The historical record shows that the police were heavily influenced by sensationalist media, which often fueled speculation rather than fact. The sheer volume of rumors, the conflicting testimonies, and the public hysteria created a perfect storm of misinformation. What the authorities needed was objective science, not public panic. Forensic science in 1888 was at its infancy. Fingerprinting was a developing technology, and DNA analysis was centuries away. This limitation is perhaps the single greatest barrier to solving the case today. Investigators were reliant on eyewitness testimony, which, in the fog and chaos of the slums, was unreliable at best. They had to piece together a narrative using limited physical evidence, clothing fragments, footprints, and the geographical movements of the victims. This struggle highlights the monumental leap that science had to make just to even begin to understand what was happening. The case became a foundational text for the future of criminal justice. Over the following decades, countless detectives and brilliant minds have tried to solve the Ripper mystery. Some focused on the surgical aspect of the wounds, suggesting a medical professional. Others focused on the class aspect, pointing to a man from the working class who felt invisible. Every theory is meticulously documented, yet none has been conclusively proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The records are filled with suspects, profiles, and circumstantial evidence, a vast, frustrating mosaic of potential truths. We must treat these theories not as answers, but as academic studies into human behavior under extreme duress. The most compelling, yet frustrating, pieces of evidence relate to the killer's apparent knowledge of the victims. The assailant seemed to know how to incapacitate, how to move through the fog, and how to leave a scene that would be discovered only hours later. This suggests a level of planning and operational security that speaks to a highly disciplined individual. Furthermore, the killer never left a calling card, no manifesto, no identifiable signature. This absence of a signature is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence, confirming that the goal was not communication, but absolute, terrifying control. The killer was a shadow that understood the limits of human detection. The true revelation of the Ripper case isn't a face or a name, it's the understanding of how systemic failure allowed the killer to thrive. The police were hampered by social prejudices, limited resources, and the primitive nature of forensic science. The system failed the women of Whitechapel. This failure is documented in court records and police reports, serving as a chilling indictment of the era's justice system. The killer exploited the poverty, the neglect, and the institutional limitations of the time. What we learn from this cold case is that even with the passage of time, the echoes of injustice remain. The ultimate verdict, after over a century of investigation, remains silence. The killer remains unidentified. The case is an enduring symbol of the limits of human knowledge and the enduring nature of fear. While countless theories have emerged, from disgraced doctors to foreign spies, none has been definitively proven. The evidence remains circumstantial, a tapestry of unanswered questions. The enduring mystery serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most important pieces of evidence are the gaps in our collective memory, the moments that slip through the cracks of history. The case remains open, a testament to the unsolved.